Hey out there, legal warriors. 3 myths that you need to know that involve the police and you. Stay tuned. We're going to cover this next. My name is Attorney Lance Fryrear. I'm a defense attorney in Linwood, Washington. My law firm has been defending people charged with crimes all throughout Washington State for more than 20 years. I'm putting out these videos to help educate the public. So if you find this useful, please like and please subscribe. More people will get the help they need. Now I'm just going to jump right into it. There are 3 myths I want to cover in this video that are basically common misperceptions, things you may have seen in movies, things you may have heard from your friends. And what's common in these myths, they involve interaction between police and you. And so this is really the most important thing that we need to think about when dealing with the police personally. If they're looking at us for some type of situation, what are the rules they have to follow? What are the myths that we've heard about on TV or the movies? And how can we protect ourselves? So, number 1, I think the myth that we hear the most out there is that the police have to tell you if they are a police officer. And hopefully we understand that the police do not have to say, yes, I'm a police officer, if someone asks them if they're a police officer, especially if they're in an undercover role. How many times have we all seen that movie where someone says, well, you have to tell me you're a police officer if you are, or maybe it's Breaking Bad, maybe it's some other type of TV show, maybe it's To Catch a Predator back from the Dateline NBC days. But basically, I want you all to know it's very important that an officer is allowed to use subterfuge, is allowed to trick us, is allowed to lie to us as part of the investigatory function, right? So they don't have to identify themselves as a police officer if they're doing an investigation. Now, of course, if they're going to take control of you and command you around, then they're going to have to show their authority, right? They're going to have to say I'm an officer before they could charge you with obstructing or something for not following their rules, but absolutely not. Do not think because someone says they're not a police officer means they're not a police officer. We see it on prostitution stings. We see it on drug buys. We see it on anything where a police officer is undercover. Where else can an officer lie? Well, during an interrogation, right? YouTube is exploded with interrogation videos, and I admit I watch them myself, that just show officers again and again making up stuff to try to get someone to admit to something. This can lead to false confessions. This can lead to people saying things that aren't true to try to get themselves in less trouble than the trouble they imagine they're in because of the supposed evidence the officer has talked about that they're potentially lying about. So remember, an officer doesn't have to identify themselves, and they are allowed to lie to us. So I think the second myth we need to worry about for our interaction with police officers is we don't have to always do what they say when it comes to requests, right? The most important thing I'd want to think about is, hey, do you want to do field sobriety tests? Well, we have the right to say no to that in Washington State. In other states, they may be different, but in Washington State, and that's where I practice, we could say no to a field sobriety test. And we don't have to do that. And what's an officer want to do in that situation? They want you to think that if you cooperate, they might let you go. But of course, we all know a field sobriety test is pretty much a rigged game. There's really no way to pass it, in my opinion, because it's subjective. It's not often instructed right or scored right. What else can we say no to? An officer wants to draw our blood. Hey, can I draw your blood for this DUI? You don't have to agree to that, right? They can get a search warrant if they want your blood. Hey, why don't you just take a polygraph test? Would you mind to take a polygraph test? Well, you don't have to do that either. We do not have to do certain voluntary things that the officer asks us to do. What do we have to do? Well, if we're driving in a car and they have a good reason to stop us, or they think they do, they can command us in and out of the car. They can command us to stay away from their investigation. We can't obstruct what they're doing, but we also don't have to exactly do what they ask us to do. So there's different things. I can't cover everything here, but realize at least for field sobriety tests, for blood draws, for polygraphs, we don't have to do those things if we don't want to. Moving on to the third thing that we don't have to do in our interaction with the police, the myth. The myth is, hey, we need to talk to the police so they think we're innocent. If we don't talk to them when they want to question us, then we must be hiding something. Well, that's just simply not the case. We have an absolute right to remain silent in Washington State. We do not have to answer police officer questions. If a police shows up at your house and they're talking about, hey, where was your son last night? They think your son was involved in something. You don't have to say anything about where you knew your son was or not, or your daughter was or not. If the police show up and say, hey, tell me where you were last night, you don't have to tell them where you were last night. If the police say, have you been drinking? You don't have to answer whether or not you've been drinking, right? You don't have to volunteer evidence against yourself. And under our Constitution, they can't use your silence against you. What's that mean? It means they can't put the officer in the stand and say, hey, Mr. Officer, when you asked whether or not defendant was drinking, they didn't answer, did they? So that must mean they were drinking, huh? No, that's not how it works. They can't even ask that question in court. It could be written down in a police report, but it can't be used against somebody as actual evidence of the opposite of what they're saying. Well, if you didn't say anything, that must mean you're agreeing with what I asked you. No, that's not how it works. Additionally, we have to remember one thing on why we don't have to talk to the police. There is a law that prohibits us from making material misstatements of fact to police officers. If we mess something up and we said it was blue and it was really red and it was an honest mistake, that's not a crime. But if we purposely make a material misstatement of fact to a law enforcement officer who we know is doing an investigation, and that officer is likely to rely on that statement in doing their investigation, then that could be a crime, typically a non-felony, typically a gross misdemeanor of making a false statement to a police officer. So it's important that we remember we have the right to remain silent, but there are laws against us misleading the police, lying to the police, sending them on a wild goose chase. And you know what? That will get charged. If they can prove it, they will charge it. So those are three myths. I want you to be protected. I want you to understand that officers, if they're looking at you for something they think you did, typically they're not your friend. They're going to act like they're your friend. They're going to try to manipulate you into doing things. If they're undercover, they don't have to say they're police, and we simply don't have to talk to them. So if you find this useful, please like and please subscribe. More people get the help they need. And more importantly, if you have a situation where you need help with a crime in Washington State, feel free to give my office a call. We'll listen to what happened. We'll identify a way forward, and we will be there for you. Thank you.